That's the strangest act I've ever seen.
In 1985, CBS ran a Muppet Babies spin-off that was so rushed and broken that Jim Henson killed it after only 3 episodes.
At what point are we doing things that are slightly too much?
Kids tuning in for the Muppet Babies suddenly got this weird basement show instead.
We got lots of stuff for you, like,
That show, Little Muppet Monsters, risked embarrassing both Henson and the Muppets, and then quietly vanished into Saturday morning purgatory.
Sometimes it's hard to believe anything comes out of my brain.
But how does the man behind the Muppet Show end up killing the follow-up to Muppet Babies? One of his biggest TV hits.
At what point is this not a good product, but instead a crass statement?
And after his homemade fantasy epic left him exhausted and financially stretched, why did he decide the answer was to have not 1, not 2, but 3 different Muppet shows on the air at the same time? With the Dark Crystal now in his rearview mirror, Jim Henson found himself in unfamiliar territory.
I think we need this income to keep the whole thing going.
His dark passion project had drained him, and the Muppet Show, the engine that kept his entire studio running, was now off the air.
It's the end of the world!
But most worrying of all was the fact that Jim's longtime producer, financial backer, and general safety net was no longer in the picture. All of that made the lesson from the Dark Crystal even more brutally clear. If he wanted to bring even more scratch-made worlds to life, Jim Henson needed a revenue-generating machine that could fund his fantasies all on its own.
The money that comes from that is also part of what makes this whole operation work. It might be nice if that were not the case, but we're part of the real world here.
Out of that pressure came 3 new Muppet shows, each designed to capitalize on a different piece of what he'd already created. A global series with segments that could be reshot and localized for whatever country was willing to pay.
Léopold.
merci beaucoup.
An animated Muppet Show spun out of a single dream sequence.
Is everything all right in here?
Yes, Nanny.
And a hasty Muppet spin-off that stretched itself past the point of recognition and quickly became one of Henson's most infamous failures.
To call Jim Henson a workaholic is an understatement. This is Toronto, the studio set of Fraggle Rock, the newest of his children's shows, which is where you'll find him when he's not commuting between London, New York, and Los Angeles.
Jim's first big step at building this machine was with his secret project Fraggle Rock, a TV series he developed while still working on the Dark Crystal. Many of the hard lessons from that film, tight budgets and audiences struggling to connect with an all-puppet cast, could now be baked into this news show.
But Fraggle Rock, the reason for it, had more to do with the fact that we have this children's audience all over the world, and we wanted to design a show specifically to work internationally.
Making Fraggle Rock an international co-production with HBO solved one of Henson's biggest challenges. It meant that the Jim Henson Company no longer had to carry the full production cost alone.
We designed this show with the idea of doing co-productions in each country.
It also helped overseas audiences connect to a world that otherwise might have felt like a completely foreign puppet fantasy.
We also wanted to do a show that sort of related to the culture in which the show is broadcast. And in order to accomplish that, we redid the Doc and Sprocket segments in several different countries so it would reflect that particular kind of a culture.
Any international broadcaster willing to shoulder the extra cost got its own human segments, written and shot specifically for that market. So in North America, that meant Doc the inventor and his dog Sprocket in an old workshop.
Oh, Sprocket, we're gonna have good times here.
In Germany, it was the same setup but reshot with local performers.
Hier ein Katalog für dich, Brocky.
In the UK, the setting moved to a rocky lighthouse with Sprocket and a new human host named the Captain.
Hey, Sprocket, do you hear that? We'll have to make sure the place is well locked up tonight, eh?
And in France, Doc and his dog Croquette ran a small bakery instead.
Eh bien, Croquette, tu traques le pygmée.
What Jim quickly discovered was that these segments did more than just connect to each specific culture. Giving viewers a human anchor made the strangeness of an all-puppet world and the show's big themes that much more approachable.
With Fraggle Rock, we're trying to do something. We're trying to do a show that has a nice reason for being. And we're trying to deal with some of these kinds of ideas that are valuable to kids, whether working together in groups or understanding the point of view of another group of people.
And even though it premiered on a small cable channel with limited reach in the US, Fraggle Rock proved Jim Henson could build a fantasy world that circled the globe, all while paying for itself. But it's what came next that showed him just how hard this machine could be pushed, and how quickly his decisions around his most beloved characters could spin out of control.
The productions that we do are expensive. The people that we work with have to be well paid. And so that's all part of the money that makes it all go. It might be nice if we never needed to do that. You know, that would be lovely.
Less than 2 years after Fraggle Rock, Jim Henson added a second, more powerful engine to his machine with Muppet Babies. And the timing was critical, because by 1984, his company had already spent a substantial sum just to free up the rights to both the Dark Crystal and the Muppets from older contracts. On top of that, they were nearing the release of their third Muppet movie.
The good news is that Jim Henson here is here to talk about a new Muppet movie. Thank goodness, after this terrible summer of movies, that the kids are finally going to have something good to see. The Muppets Take Manhattan. That's right.
A new movie by itself was cause for celebration. But what Jim was really excited about was a brief sequence in the film that imagined his classic characters as little babies, an idea he'd been kicking around for a while, waiting for the right moment to bring them to life.
We have a number in the film that is made up with the Muppet Babies. There's a number where they imagine what they would be like if they had known each other when they were kids.
That instinct paid off. The sequence became an immediate favorite with audiences and advertisers. And behind the scenes, Henson had already been working with CBS on a co-produced Saturday morning cartoon based on these babies, with Marvel Productions handling the animation while his company maintained creative control.
The Saturday morning show that we're doing is really a nice experiment. It's something we're quite excited about because we're trying to design a show that really encourages kids to use their imagination. And so it's something I haven't tried Saturday morning before, and so this for me is a nice experiment.
When Muppet Babies premiered just 2 months after The Muppets Take Manhattan, it quickly became one of Jim's most critically and commercially successful projects. There were Emmy Awards, explosive ratings, a wave of lucrative merchandise, and a fresh stream of cash to power this machine to build just about any fantasy world he could dream up. And because the show only required him to license his characters and ideas while still keeping creative control, it all seemed too good to be true.
You know, if he doesn't get enough sleep, he wakes up all grumpy and grouchy.
For CBS, it proved something else. Tiny Muppets on Saturday mornings were an unbeatable opportunity. They just needed a way to get even more of them on screen. And so, once Muppet Babies' first season proved to be a breakout hit, CBS came calling for a quick spin-off series, one that could be tacked on to the end of each episode of Babies, giving them a full 60-minute block of Saturday morning Muppets, and that much more advertising money. A series that would push Jim's machine, and even the Muppets, to their breaking point.
We're always riding a line between what, servicing the needs of the audience and little kids who want to have a Fozzie Bear or a Miss Piggy or a Wembley Fraggle in their room, or they want to, they enjoy having it on their clothes. And that's one side of it, and the other side of it are if we shove a whole lot of products out there and we start taking advantage of the audience.
By 1985, the engine Henson and his company had built was running at full tilt, and Jim was already cashing in to finance his next gamble on a new fantasy world for the big screen.
Henson is now preparing a new film in his London workshop. The workshop itself is something of a labyrinth. Everywhere you look, there's another watchful eye, another strange creature. It can take as much as 3 weeks to perfect even a single pair of hands for one of his creations.
Fraggle Rock was in its 3rd season and already preparing for its 4th. Muppet Babies was gearing up for its 2nd. And all of this was on top of Jim's creative responsibilities on Sesame Street, which also had its own movie in production that year.
Here now, the report is our correspondent, Kermit the Frog.
Why does a chicken not cross the road? Because it's chicken, get it?
That didn't leave much time to conceptualize a new Muppet Babies companion show, one CBS wanted on the air in just 9 months. It was far from ideal, but everyone agreed that it could be done with some creative license applied. For the concept, Jim started with the same core idea as Muppet Babies, the power of imagination, but applied to slightly older, more contemporary kids. At the time, he was fascinated by the availability of affordable camcorders and believed that it would enable children to become their own content creators, not just consumers. With this as the basis, the team came up with a variety show concept called Little Muppet Monsters, featuring 3 brand new Muppet kids running a chaotic DIY TV station in the basement of the house where the more famous Muppets lived.
They're down in the basement, everybody knows. Little Muppet Monsters. They built a crazy gizmo and they're putting on show. Little Muppet Monsters.
This variety concept meant that the show didn't rely on a single format and could split the workload between live-action Muppet performers and animated sequences from the Muppet Babies team.
Uh-oh. What is it, Fuzzy? Oh, I see something big and ugly and covered with fur. It's frightening. Fuzzy, you're looking at yourself in the rearview mirror. Oh.
It also presented an opportunity to reintroduce the classic adult Muppets and many of the original skit ideas to a brand new audience, which meant they didn't have to invent every segment from scratch, and gave CBS plenty of extra marketing hooks for this new show.
Let me handle this. I have a way with frogs. Listen, Newty, how about Roo and Watt talk this over? Pig to Pollywog.
The series was rough. A Frankenstein's monster that was part Muppet chaos, part Saturday morning cartoon, and all on a production schedule the team could never realistically meet. What they did have, though, was a full-hour block of Saturday morning Muppets, confusingly called Jim Henson's Muppets, Babies, and Monsters. It wasn't pretty, but it was a product that technically checked all of CBS's boxes.
There are 8 million stories in Muppet City, and I think I just wrote one.
But Jim Henson was about to find out what happens when the engine he'd carefully built runs in the red for too long, and how the very structure he was betting his future on would lead straight into one of his biggest disasters.
Yes, it's from Jim Henson's new TV series called Jim Henson's Muppet Babies and Monsters.
You said you'd spend some time with me.
Oh, yeah, when the show's over, Piggy.
When Little Muppet Monsters premiered after Muppet Babies in September 1985, it was immediately clear that something was very off.
Make me a sandwich. I'm starved. This is ridiculous.
The variety show format left the show feeling like a patchwork collection of segments that had no business being together.
Say, Uncle Kermit, did you write a detective story for this week?
Yep, all finished. And you're gonna love it.
The new monster kids, who act as the glue for the entire show, fall completely flat and lack the energy and imagination audiences had just seen in Muppet Babies. Even the segments with classic Muppet characters like Kermit and Fozzie are oddly forgettable, feeling more like tired imitations of their past selves.
Sometimes I'm really amazed at my own creativity. Unfortunately, this isn't one of those times.
The worst offenders, though, are the animated segments, which look cheap, rushed, and leave the characters looking more Hanna-Barbera than Henson.
Tennis! Not tennis, animal. What? Gymnastics.
Behind the scenes, things weren't faring much better. Jim's insane schedule left almost no time for any involvement, meaning creative oversight often fell on his already overworked team leaders. But the problem went well beyond creative challenges. There just wasn't enough time to get these different segments finished and ready for air.
Now, this story has something in common with all great detective stories. It's over.
While it was technically possible for the Muppet performers to churn out the necessary live-action wraparound scenes, the animated parts were a very different story. Marvel Productions just didn't have the bandwidth to deliver weekly animation for 2 different shows, and quickly fell behind.
I was determined to wait for Fozzie no matter how long it took. It took exactly 2 minutes. After all, how long could anyone put up with Fozzie's jokes?
To fill its spot in the schedule and give Marvel more time to animate, CBS plugged in a second episode of Muppet Babies. By this point, according to storyboard director Scott Shaw, Jim Henson had already decided that Little Muppet Monsters hadn't lived up to his standards, and the best course of action was to kill the show and bury the remaining episodes, ensuring nobody would associate the Muppets with such a slapdash production.
That's it for this week, kids. This is Gonzo the Great, reminding you that weirdness is in the eye of the beholder. See what I mean?
Adding fuel to the fire was the fact that the Muppet Babies rerun that had temporarily replaced Little Muppet Monsters was doing exceptionally well in the ratings. And when CBS realized that they could still get their full hour of Saturday morning Muppets without the hassle of producing a second show, that pretty much sealed the deal. Henson's brief Muppet Babies spin-off was no more.
Hit it, Nikki!
9 months of crunch time on a show meant to turn one hit into a full hour of Saturday morning Muppets, all gone after just 3 weeks. It was a brutal reminder of just how unforgiving the machine can be when pushed too hard for too long, and that not even Jim Henson could rescue a half-baked idea.
I don't ask you personal questions, do I? So why don't you ask me a personal question so I can understand how you feel?
Okay, how's your sex life?
It was Jim's biggest and clearest indication yet that he couldn't afford to keep his head in the clouds. When the dreamer also becomes the businessman, it's no longer only about what worlds can be built. Just as important is deciding which worlds should never see the light of day. And if there's one thing that Fraggle Rock, Muppet Babies, and Little Muppet Monsters taught him, it's that disciplined, well-structured, and commercially successful worlds can be built by the larger team if they're given both the time and the focus. But just as critical was the realization that Jim Henson couldn't be everywhere, and that overextension can have catastrophic consequences.
We didn't want to end up killing a lot of people.
All of this would be critical because Jim Henson was already making his way through the web of winding corridors of his next big gamble. But not even the lessons he'd learned from Little Muppet Monsters or from the Dark Crystal could prepare him for what lay at its center. This is just one chapter in Jim Henson's larger journey. If you want to see why he needed this machine in the first place, watch how the Dark Crystal nearly broke him. But if you're ready, the next chapter is where things get really twisted.